Elvira didn't swallow a worm. She swallowed happening, folks. When we think of fairy tales, we usually associate them with children's stories, but originally, fairy tales were actually written for adults, and they usually evolved directly from folk tales. Now, folk tales, traditionally speaking, were usually passed down verbally, often within families and down through generations, whereas fairy tales were usually written down. And from fairy tales, by extension, we eventually ended up with nursery rhymes and children's stories. Now, originally speaking, again, fairy tales were written to entertain and educate people. And some of them explored some surprisingly complex universal themes. And because of all that, fairy tales make fantastic targets for modern movie makers who've become less and less imaginative as the making money with movies formula has become more and more streamlined. And unfortunately, because so many modern movie makers do lack imagination, most of the horror movies based on fairy tales and children's stories tend to suck. But today's movie is not just an exception to that rule, it is a lesson in how to do things properly. Instead of just trying to get rich off of the recently expired copyrights of a handful of beloved children's characters, today's movie uses one of the most famous fairy tales to examine things like self-esteem and beauty standards, and maybe most importantly, what the word ugly actually means. Writer and director Emily Blichfeld takes a tiny bit of Walt Disney and a tiny bit of classic Brothers Grimm and a tiny bit of 17th century Charles Perrault, mixes it in with plenty of her own nasty original material to bring us a film I was not expecting after seeing the trailer. With a big thank you to my pal Jason at Sinister Cinema for the heads up on this one. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Den Stigo Stepsister, or The Ugly Stepsister. She couldn't possibly be uglier than my pronunciation. The movie kicks off with our main character Elvira dreaming of Prince Julian until reality slaps her back awake again. She and her sister Alma are on their way to their new French home with their recently widowed mother Rebecca. Upon arriving, they're greeted by Rebecca's new husband Otto and his daughter Agnes. 3 minutes and 0 bonding seconds later, and the two families are officially merged.
Till the one day when the lady met this fellow.
Agnes gives her new stepsister Elvira the grand tour. There's some of the tension you'd expect between two strangers thrown together in a situation like this, but the whole place feels very fairy tale-ish to Elvira, especially when she spots Prince Julian's castle right outside the window. Subtlety. Might I remind you folks, this is a fairy tale. And this naturally charming setting is about as fairy tale as it gets, as Elvira has basically just woken up once upon a time in a kingdom far, far away. She's even clutching the prince's book of poetry to her bosom. I mean, come on. That night, while they're toasting their hasty union, poor Otto expires abruptly at the dinner table. When Elvira tries supporting her grieving stepsister in the following days by sharing how hard it was for her when her own father died, Agnes tears her a new one for even implying they're equals socially, emotionally, or otherwise. And in her emotional rage, Agnes inadvertently drops the big bomb. Elvira's mother's money is the only reason they're there. Plot twist, Rebecca married Otto thinking he had money. By the time Elvira gets down the hallway to fill her mom in on the news, her mom already knows because the rest of Otto's family has already swept in and taken everything, except for a handful of coins. It's worth pointing out at this stage of the story, Elvira is so innocent and naive, even the coins impress her. Mother Rebecca promptly collapses into melodramatic despair, lamenting how nobody's ever going to want her again, not at her age, and certainly not with her two useless daughters in tow. So Elvira, ever the dutiful and devoted daughter, decides to save the family by marrying Prince Julian, to which Rebecca, always ready with matriarchal encouragement, suggests she go look in a mirror. And then, with the convenient conventional timing you'd expect from a fairy tale, a royal messenger arrives the next morning with official invitations for every available virgin in the land. Really brings me back to my high school days. But I read fairy tales in high school too. The king is shopping for a princess for his prince, and when Rebecca realizes her daughter might be worth something after all, Elvira's carted off to the charmingly named Dr. Aesthetic, who cheerfully plies her braces off, then proceeds to shatter the bridge of her nose with a hammer and a chisel.
I don't want to pop up here with tidbits of trivia every time something cool happens, so I'm just going to say this. Every method used in this story to correct Elvira's perceived aesthetic deficiencies was at one point an official medical procedure. Every single one of them. And they were medical procedures a lot more recently than you probably think.
Oh, I suppose while we're here, these opposing reactions to Elvira's screams help designate two of this fairy tale's archetypal characters. The perverse satisfaction all over Mother Rebecca's face designates her as one of our villains, and Sister Alma is our audience proxy, meaning she's the voice of our inner monologues as we watch the movie. Of course, Rebecca knows a cute nose and straight teeth won't be enough on their own. Elvira's also going to need grace and charm and whatever else it takes to snag a prince. So Elvira's enrolled in a finishing school too, along with every other virginal prospect in the region. The girls will learn to entice the prince, and those who underperform will be eliminated early on. And early on, it is quite clear the instructor is not fond of Elvira, and that adds to our sympathy for the poor girl. That night, while Elvira's dining on lemon water to cut some weight, Agnes expresses her frustrations at Rebecca spending money on her daughter's culturing when she should be spending it on burying her father, who is currently rotting in the back room. But stepmother Rebecca assures her money isn't the only way to pay for things, which is a curious statement coming from such a stately woman.
A few weeks in, and the school posts a list of all the ladies who made the cut. And much to Elvira's total shock, and to ours, she's made it through. But before she has a moment to revel in this little victory, her instructor lets her know, right in front of the whole class, she only made it in because her mother bribed her. And that puts us even more on Elvira's side. I mean, look at those big sad eyes.
And just when she thought things couldn't get worse, Elvira tries on some of Agnes's clothes later on, but they don't fit. That's probably because the poor girl keeps hiding sweets around the house to devour privately as she is starving. The next day, Elvira confides in Madame Sophie, the kind and supportive teacher at the school, by telling her she thinks she's fat and ugly. And it bears noting she only started thinking that when the other women started telling her that. But Madame Sophie assures her she's wrong and offers her a little something to help her outer beauty catch up with her inner glow. And that little something is the egg of a tapeworm ingested to latch onto her intestinal wall and soak up all the nutrients from her food, kind of like a medieval Ozempic, reassuring her constantly overreacting to everything Sister Alma, who, as our audience proxy, is actually the only sane one here. Elvira insists it's no big deal. Once she bags the prince, she'll drink the antidote and she'll be right as rain again. Then Elvira brings the first act to a close by swallowing the worm.
Later that night, we are treated to something you don't see often in modern fairy tales.
In a shocking scene, to say the least, we discover Agnes isn't anywhere close to virginity, and we're shown exactly what she's doing with the stable boy. For the record, she loves him. Also, for the record, this scene contains full high school anatomy textbook visuals, folks. Do not watch this one with your kids. When Mother Rebecca finds out what Agnes has been up to in the barn, the film veers into some interesting and unexpected territory. When Agnes is cast to the floor in front of the hearth, the Cinderella imagery is obvious, but very well done.
This seemingly insignificant development shifts the entire premise. Up until now, at the 45-minute point, we've been following Elvira as if she is this story's underdog. We've been actively rooting for her to find the happiness and self-confidence she truly deserves, while we've been hoping her stepsister Agnes gets what's coming to her. But as Agnes's social status is being degraded to that of the hired help on the stone floor, Elvira is enjoying another stolen pastry in her room with a smile on her face. And that leaves us wondering the obvious. How did Mother Rebecca find out about Agnes's little transgression in the barn?
We rejoin the gang 3 months later. Agnes has been demoted to full-time farmhand, and the fairy tale landscapes are stunning, but nowhere near as stunning as Elvira's physical transformation. Her nose is delicate and refined. The tapeworm's done its work in terms of slimming her down, and my hat's off to the makeup and special effects department. She looks like a different human being, but at no point do you ever see anything remotely unnatural looking in her transformation. Elvira's physical change is nearly complete, but it's paired with a much darker internal shift, manifested here when she glares at Agnes through the window. It would appear the tables have flipped 180 degrees in a very short period of time.
Next up on Mother Rebecca's list of barbaric cosmetic procedures, and eerily reminiscent of another eye-centric scene from a film that has just as much to say about contemporary society. Elvira undergoes a procedure made popular in late 19th century Paris, where hair was stitched into the eyes of prostitutes and actresses to enhance their look.
This scene is also shown very close up in graphic detail, and if you've got an eye thing, you really won't like it. Unable to sleep through the pain or see through her swollen eyes, Elvira stumbles into the barn searching for food. Agnes, now a glorified farmhand, silently offers her something to eat. The true ugly stepsister's identity is beginning to reveal itself, and it is not who the fairy tale's opening act led us to expect. Back at school, Elvira's finally getting noticed. Her instructor acknowledges her presence, and Elvira's quick to notice the noticing. That tiny scrap of approval feeds her growing vanity and pushes her further from the wide-eyed, kind-hearted girl we met in Act 1. Agnes also notices something. Elvira's hair is falling out. That's one of the charming, more obvious side effects of the 2-foot-long tapeworm using her intestinal wall like a poolside snack bar.
Mother Rebecca arranges a special gown for the ball, and she calls Agnes in to help Elvira get into it. Only this time, Agnes is called by a different name.
Oskipot!
And in English, that means Cinderella. And I know that because I'm well-traveled and well-read, and it's said it in the subtitles.
When the school dressmaker delivers her new dress and sees the bald patches, she just covers it up with a wig. Later, Elvira catches Agnes trying to reclaim her own gown from Elvira's room, so she loses her cool and shreds the dress before Mother breaks things up. Then Elvira's knocked out by one of Rebecca's sleeping potions, and I'll mention for your consideration, insomnia is another sign you might have a tapeworm infestation. As she slips into unconsciousness, Agnes mourns at her father's rotting corpse, triggering a classic fairy tale turn in the arrival of her spirit mother, our stand-in for Perrault's 1697 fairy godmother. This ghost mom doesn't come alone, though. She commands the army of silkworms living inside Dad's decomposing body to spin Agnes a gown and shoes from his remains.
Allow me the absolute pleasure of repeating that for you, my friends. The dress Agnes is going to wear to the big ball was made by the silkworms, with silk they spun after feasting on her dead father's rotting corpse. Are you listening to me, Reese Fake Waterfield? Because you should be. This is beautiful and grotesque and original all at the same time. And plastic masks are none of those things.
Big night finally arrives, and Mother's there to ensure all goes to plan. Prior to the festivities kicking off, she tells her daughter to present her paws, reminding us of the obvious parallels to a dog show. The ladies are paraded before the prince, one at a time, with their vital stats and resumes read aloud. And if you squint really hard, you can almost see a leash in Mother's hand. All the early signs are pointing towards Elvira taking home the Best Bitch in Show award.
Don't look at me like that. It's an actual dog show thing. It's not my fault you're not cultured.
And the prince does designate her as his top pick, right until Agnes arrives. And it all proves too much for even this cold-hardened version of our lead character.
In fairy tales, weddings usually symbolize the commitment and fulfillment of a new life for the characters. And while that might still happen here, I would like to remind you about what happened at the start of this story. In addition to entertaining us and exploring complex themes, fairy tales can also teach us a moral lesson. Rebecca and Otto intended to marry each other because both of them thought the other person had money. Viewed through a moral lens, Otto's already dead, so now we're waiting to see what's going to happen to Rebecca.
Elvira rushes into another room to discover her stomach is full of tapeworm eggs. As she's examining her own leavings up close in crisp HD, Rebecca, the medieval mother of the year, screams at her to pull herself together and go find a different man. So Elvira spends the rest of her ball watching her mother hanging off multiple strange men while her rightful destiny hangs off her stepsister. When midnight strikes, Agnes flees as her dress disintegrates when its magic expires, and she leaves behind a single slipper. The prince declares he'll only marry the one it fits, but Elvira's got different plans.
Now, to really drive home Elvira's final descent going into this closing act, director Emily Blickfield really cranks up the body horror and graphic depictions of Elvira's physical and psychological disintegration. And it's fucking brilliant.
And after a scuffle between Agnes and the cleaver-wielding Elvira, Mother Rebecca tells her daughter it's all over and to knock it off while she's getting ready to service yet another man. But Elvira's snagged the elusive shoe, and when it doesn't fit, she pulls a page straight from the Brothers Grimm and decides she'll have to hack her toes off. Not coincidentally, she makes the decision to do it in the exact location and position Agnes was in when everything was taken from her. Nice touch. And when the toes come off, it is some brilliant body horror and glorious gore. It's close up and practical and raw looking. And because of all that, I can't show you any of it. Elvira's screaming brings the family running, and sensible Alma is horrified. When she asks Rebecca what they're going to do, Rebecca calmly reassures them both. Mother's here. She's gonna fix it. And by fix it, she means Elvira cut off the wrong toes, as the prince has the left shoe.
You won't hear me say this often on this channel or in real life, but the scene that follows is so well done and matter of fact, it could be difficult to watch for a lot of people, myself included, even as a fan of Hellraiser and The Thing and literally everything David Cronenberg ever made. I stand corrected. Most things Cronenberg made.
When Elvira wakes up, she's got no toes left at all thanks to Mumsy. And as her new situation is dawning on her, the prince arrives outside demanding all noble virgins present themselves for an impromptu shoe fitting. So, still refusing to quit, she drags her bald-headed, broken-nosed, toeless self down the stairs, just in time to learn the prince has already found a home for the shoe on Agnes's pretty little foot. As a bit of a side note, folks, I want you to check this out with me. This movie is a collaborative effort with Norway and Poland and Sweden and Denmark all involved in the production, and the total budget was roughly $17 million. The image you're looking at is crystal clear. Her face is about as close as it could get to the lens without losing focus, and there's not a single speck of CGI or computer-generated imagery in this shot. Her nose is badly broken and pushed into the unmistakable question mark shape of a pro boxer's. Her front tooth is cracked in half, and her lower lip interacts with the gaping hole anytime her mouth moves. And also, she's mostly bald. Try finding evidence of the bald cap or the place the prosthetic latex starts before leading into her pulverized nose. I couldn't find any of it, and I looked. My point?
Dear Hollywood, this is the sort of thing you could accomplish too if you just put your stories first, and perhaps you were motivated by a love of telling stories and not fashion or fame or profit. Just saying. And speaking of not being motivated by fashion,
Alma revives her sister on the floor and tells her it's time to leave. All they have to do first is remove the pesky tapeworm. Drinking the antidote ushers out the second act and ushers in a rough final scene I can't show you in full either. Suffice it to say, her tapeworm friend leaves, but he does not do it quietly or without a fight. To help finance their escape and future lives together, Alma lifts some of Agnes's old jewelry, right as her mother's giving this blonde fella his own fairy tale happy ending. And again, folks, for your information, don't watch this scene with children in the room. This brings Rebecca's fairy tale story arc full circle from the woman who cast Agnes out for doing something similar with somebody she actually loved. The sisters wheelbarrow their way down the steps to their horse and their freedom, and the giggle Elvira manages with her sister on the way down tells us so much more than it seems to at first glance. The film closes with two ravens pecking away at the remnants of the tapeworm tapeworm on the castle lawn. And through a fairy tale lens, maybe that suggests Mother Rebecca definitely won't find her own happy ending, given the ravens appear to remain behind at the castle with her. But I'd like to think it means something far more tragic and triumphant at the same time, which as far as I'm concerned is the perfect ending for a fairy tale.
You might be wondering why I've divided this story up based on the tapeworm. You might be wondering why I suggested Elvira's giggle on the way down the stairs meant a lot more than you might think. And finally, you might be wondering why I mentioned so many of the side effects associated with tapeworms along the way.
Before Elvira swallowed the worm, she was lovely and caring and empathetic, and we were all rooting for her. She wanted to marry the prince, and it never occurred to her she wasn't enough the way she was. But that all changed the moment she accepted what everybody else told her and swallowed the worm. And after her voice of reason sister helped her remove the tapeworm, we saw the old Elvira again, giggling in spite of her newly deformed, physically battered self.
I can break this down both as a plot event and as the story's bigger metaphor, and I am able to do that because this story is well written.
As a plot event, another side effect of tapeworm infection is significant personality change. If her hair was falling out, you can bet she was experiencing all the other side effects in equal measure. And in this context, that means the tapeworm caused her awful behavior. Now, as a metaphor, on the other hand, to me the ravens represent a happy ending, because they're not actually eating a worm.
Elvira didn't swallow a worm. She swallowed a lie.
She swallowed the propaganda other women fed her, suggesting women need to do all these things to become beautiful when they already were to begin with. Spitting out the worm at the end of the story is spitting out that lie. And as hard as it is watching her at the end of this story, giggling immediately after expelling the worm tells us she's free of that lie forever. She has no toes and no hair and a busted nose and no prince, and that is tragic, but fairy tales are about transformation. And after these story events, Elvira's rejected the societal notion she is not enough, which is as triumphant as a fairy tale ending can get.
If you've seen The Ugly Stepsister already, I would love to hear your thoughts down in the comments section. Thank you again to my pal Jason at Sinister Cinema for the heads up on this movie. As always, thank you very much for watching my little video, and until next time, folks.